Hey free to play gang, welcome back to another video. So today let's take a look at Unky and where I think he's good at and what are the relic sets that I think he excels in. Or rather, what are the relic sets that I think works really well for his kit. So let's take a look at Unky over here. Let's take a look at his skills first. Skill number 1 is just basically a normal attack that increases his AP by 25%. And here's his passive, Ties That Bind. Grants crit rate up for 2 turns and attack up for 1 turn to 2 random allies at the start of each turn. So the attack up and the crit rate up do not need to go onto the same Esper. They can completely go onto different random Espers. So that is essentially 4 different buffs onto potentially 4 different Espers. Reduces the ability cooldowns by 1 turn for all those allied Espers if an attack up buff is already present. So clearly, in order for this passive to probably work well, or rather his third skill, which I'll get into that in a little bit, for those skills to work well, you need to have more than 1 attack buff. But for the sake of today's video, we're just going to assume that you're running with 1 attack buffer. Of course, there are other alternatives that you can run. Unky with Suhua, because Suhua can just buff everyone's attack first, followed by Unky who will then reduce everyone's cooldown with his passive here or his third skill, which we will get into. So Ropes of Destiny grants attack up to the team for 2 turns, reduces the ability cooldowns of a teammate, not himself, of a teammate by 1 turn, if an attack up buff is already present. So this is very similar to his passive, except that his passive continues to provide attack buff for every 2 turns, as you can see from his cooldown of the passive. But for his third skill, unfortunately, there is a cooldown of 4 turns. So what you will see is there is a staggered arrangement of how often he can reduce the cooldowns of his allies. So this skill needs to be ready and this passive needs to be ready at the same time. So that leads to some difficulty in abusing his cooldown reduction, right? And the relic set that I think works the best for him, and I think this is a hands down basis, is going to be the Ocean Waves relic set. Now some players may choose to run Windwalker because they want him to take the first turn to buff everyone's attack, and some people also think that, you know, the faster I take my turn, the more frequently I can reduce the cooldowns of my allies. While that is logically true, it is not the most efficient way to reduce the cooldown of your allies. And also, you don't really need a whole ton of speed in order to buff your damage dealers. You just need to be faster than them, and generally speaking, 180 or maybe even 150 speed is sometimes good enough to outspeed your DPS units. But anyway, here is his 2-set relic. I'm going with Sword of Atara instead of maybe some other popular choices such as Adamantine. And the reason is because I need him to counterattack. So the more he counterattacks, the more he will trigger his first skill, which increases his own AP by 25%. So whenever he lands a counter attack, he's going to increase his AP, which allows us to take more turns, and more turns means more cooldown reduction, so that's the way I look at it. But before we get into some combat itself, I want to show you a little spreadsheet of what I've done to illustrate why I think Ocean Waves is a lot better than Windwalker. Okay, so this is the first time I'm using OBS, so you're seeing my video first time in my life in a horizontal mode and not vertical mode. But anyway, so this is what I'm talking about. So this is the base case. This is using Windwalker, okay? So this is the Unky spreadsheet, of course. And as you can see over here, I've created I've at least shown you guys what the formula is for how I derive this, but this is really very simple. So when your cooldown is ready, basically when the number here is 1, when your skill 2 cooldown is ready, when your skill 3 cooldown is ready, this is when you would then reduce your allies cooldown, right? Because you will use your passive first, followed by your active skill. And what this means is 2 of your allies who have received your passive attack buff would then have their cooldowns reduced with your third skill over here. So that's why ally cooldown reduction is true. And then next, obviously there will be no more cooldown reductions over here because when you're using your passive on your third turn, your skill 3 is not actually ready yet, so you're not going to reduce anyone's cooldown. So henceforth, this is going to be the fixed pattern using a Windwalker set. And as you can see over here, this is just like the summary of whatever, right? So Unky speed, let's say you are at 200 speed. Because you're using Windwalker, I think 200 is quite manageable. But it's not so important for this right now, but I'm just using it for later. And also, I've also calculated stuff like estimated turns per ally's cooldown reduction, which is every 4 turns that Unky takes his turn, he will then successfully reduce 2 of your allies' cooldowns. And estimated turns for one specific ally. So for example, you really need your Clara skill cooldowns to go down for some reason, then it will take you about on average 10 turns just to reduce your Clara skill cooldown. So this is all just mathematical, but here's the test case. Okay, so that was the base case, and now it's the test case using Ocean Waves. As you can see over here, these numbers over here, these are all random, so I can just like reload them and they will always constantly change. So it's kind of like the same thing. As long as this number is 1, this number is 1, we would be able to reduce our allies' cooldown. But as you can see, if we include Ocean Waves, we have a 35% chance of reducing all our skill cooldowns by 1, and that includes your passive. So every once in a while, you know, you would have your passive ready twice, And at the same time, sometimes your skill cooldown of your third skill is going to go down dramatically, which allows us to have more chances to reduce our allies' cooldown just like that. So as you can see over here, there is one huge cluster of turns that Unky Chai is actually taking that actually reduces the cooldowns of your allies, which is amazing, right? So as you can see, the estimated turns per ally cooldown is somewhere around like 2.5. Whoops. It's somewhere around 2.5, which is a huge difference as compared to 4 over here. So basically what this means is every 2.5 turns that your Unky Chai moves on average, you will actually be reducing the cooldowns of your allies, which is nuts. And also this output over here is what I want to get at. Okay, so as you can see at the left, the base case, your Unky speed needs to be 200 in order to perform a certain level of efficiency. But in order to match that same level of efficiency of a 200 speed Unky Chai on Windwalker, you only need 120 speed. So this is something that I really want to get at. Like, as you can see, you generally need about just 120 speed, which is extremely manageable. And of course, if your speed is higher, let's say with Ocean Waves, you're able to obtain like 180 to 200 speed, then obviously your Unky Chai is going to be super efficient in reducing your team's cooldowns. Okay, so I'm going to show you a PvE run because I don't think he's necessarily very good at PvP. And the reason why I don't think he's really good at PvP is if you take a look at the spreadsheet again, it may not necessarily be possible that you can even spend 2.5 turns to proc multiple cooldown reductions. It is generally not the case. PvP usually ends in like the first 2 turns or maybe like after 3 turns. So in terms of just efficiency, I think Suhua is a lot better. She brings a defense buff as well. But anyway, for this K10 run, I'm going to replace my Suhua with Unky Chai just to show you guys how powerful he can be. And also with Ocean Waves in the mix, one good thing is that now you're generating a lot of crit rate buff. So you may not necessarily need to build all your units with like 100% critical rate. You can still opt to build them with about 70% crit rate and they will still function as 100% as long as they get a crit rate buff. So I think Unky Chai really shines alongside some Espers, such as maybe Gabrielle who has a lot of cooldowns on her skills, or Ira if you just want to drop a lot of AP reduction and a lot of slows and just generally a whole ton of control. But I think there are 2 downfalls to Unky Chai. So firstly, he's not so universally useful. I don't think I'll ever use him in Temporal Tower, and the reason is because he's just a pure offensive support. He doesn't bring any kind of sustain, he does not bring any kind of crowd control, and honestly the more turns that he takes, the longer your fights may potentially last because you're kind of like wasting turns by having him take his turn, so time is actually wasted in terms of skill animation. However, that's not to say that he's not useful. Of course, you can run him alongside some supports. Like I said before, Gabrielle. I think Gabrielle is a very good unit to pair alongside him because he then reduces her cooldowns while potentially reducing her cooldowns. And also there are other alternatives like different strategies such as using Suhua alongside Unky Chai, but then the problem here is having a stacking attack buff. It's not always going to be a problem, especially when you can just turn cycle very efficiently, and then you could potentially be constantly on attack buff, which is nice. But he is, in my opinion, a very specific character. The only reason why you want to use him in place of, let's say, Suhua, or if you want to use him together with Suhua, is because you want to achieve a very specific goal. So he's not so universally useful like I mentioned before, which could potentially be a very big setback, especially for some new players who think that, whoa, Unky Chai is actually quite a good buffer. He has attack buff, he has crit rate buff. But the reality is, even right now, I'm still using Suhua in my K10 or even my A10 runs. I think a lot of the time, you don't really need to reduce your cooldowns that necessarily. You just need to have your turn orders right, you just need to have your speed tuning perfected, and you won't need to rely on this kind of RNG stuff. But anyway, that will be it for the video. This is the Unky Chai review. Hope you guys enjoyed this content and let me know what you think about the spreadsheet. Do you like the layout of this video? Do you think this is easier for your eyes? So generally, I like to make portrait videos because it's good for you to view on your phone and on the go instead of having to rely on a computer. And to add on to that, if the video is horizontal, it will be extremely painful for your eyes, especially if you're watching it on your phone, because then everything is then dimensionalized into like just a third of your screen. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, it really helps the channel. Subscribe if you want to see more Dislyte content. And this has been free to play, by the way. And as always, I will see you in the next video.